Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. My name is Mariano. That's Brent. We want to thank you guys so much for listening, and we just continue to be amazed and blown away by all the love and support. So, without further ado, let us dive right in, man. This is episode 31, How to Pick Your Programs. Now, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, all by looking up Dog Trainers Podcast. It's all one word, Dog Trainers Podcast. And we just want to give a quick shout out to a few cities that have been giving us a lot of love lately. So shout outs to Atlanta, Georgia, Gravesend, New York, Lake Stevens, Washington, and Garner, North Carolina. Thank you guys so much for listening, and do stay tuned because we've got some really cool stuff coming up in the works here for you. So we'll dive right in, and I'm going to pass it over to Brent. And the gist of the episode here is just going to be younger trainers not exactly knowing when and how to decide what programs to offer to different clients and how we go about choosing those for ourselves. And without further ado, take it away, man.
Cool. What's up, man? How you been?
I've been good.
Dude, we haven't recorded an episode in 3 weeks. We've had a lot of changes in our lives. We both got new houses. So congratulations to you, man.
Thank you. Congratulations to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're so excited to get back to this podcast. As Mariano was saying, pretty much how do we go about picking programs for our clients? But most importantly, how do we pick programs to offer to our clients, right? Now, one thing I noticed, so I mentor a lot of dog trainers in the Los Angeles area. And what I've realized is most 99.9% of dog trainers offer privates. That's kind of like extremely like the starting point. We start with some type of private. But I've noticed that not all dog trainers offer group classes, and not all dog trainers offer board and train programs. Why would you, in your opinion, Mariano, why do you think that is?
Why they don't offer board and train programs? I think it's because,
or why they don't offer group classes. But every trainer offers privates.
Yeah, well, and I'll talk about this more later, but I want to break down privates into in-home versus in-kennel, because I have met a lot of dog trainers, depending on what their career has looked like from the beginning, that are really comfortable doing in-homes. And I've met a lot of dog trainers who like work at kennels, who the first time they go to someone's house, they're like weirded out, right? But to get back to your question, so why don't people typically start with group classes or board and trains? Because they're scarier for a lot of different reasons. They're potentially riskier, meaning in a group class situation, you've got several dogs going and several owners going at once. Whereas in a board and train program, you've got the dog in your house or in your facility at all times. And we're talking potential risk. You got to feed and do every other thing, and that kind of stuff weighs on a trainer, So a private lesson is just kind of the dog is in and the dog is out, and there's not really that much risk involved. You're just dealing with one, maybe a few people at a time, but it's one dog, like 2 maximum. So yeah, I think it's less to bounce around in your brain, and it's for that reason less intimidating.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's the case. And, I think for any successful business, again, this is just my opinion. My passion has always been, how can I help as many dogs as possible? Right. So the way I that translated to me in my head is, the more services or the more types of programs that I can offer, the different types of clienteles and dogs that I can help. Right. But also I just kind of had an interest of trying to figure out how to run a group class, how to do private sessions, how to master a board and train program, how to do a day training program. How do I do programs for puppies, that are at a certain interval when they're not vaccinated under 4 months, right? Like there's all these different obstacles that I was like, oh, how can I help more dogs? How can I train more dogs? And there's also kind of this intrinsic desire of like, how do I get better at this stuff, right? How can I figure this? I see a need? How can I fulfill that need? And so what I want to, so when we're looking at programs, pretty much the programs get broken up into 2 different categories. We're either teaching the owners how to train their own dogs to solve their own problems, or we're training the dog to learn how to listen so that we can teach the owners how to solve their own problems, right? These are the general 2 categories we see. And so just to name a few programs, we see, there's board and train programs, there's day training programs where the dog goes home at the end of the day. There's weekly programs where the dog, spends Monday through Friday with you, and then goes home on the weekends to their parents. So those are kind of the we do it for them programs. And then the do it yourself program, the DIYs, would be your group classes, your private training, or some type of combination of the 2. or sometimes even a semi-private group class is also something. I've had a lot of friends who had puppies around the same time. We do a semi-private, which is, you have some of the benefits of a group class, but it's private enough and where it's not as hectic as a traditional group class you would do at a park or at a building.
Right.
So we kind of have these two categories. Now, each of these services, they kind of lend themselves to a couple different types of scenarios, right? Or different types of dogs, different types of clientele. So I guess I kind of want to dive into that a little bit. Would you mind helping me out with that, Mark?
Yeah, so let's start with price point, because I think that's usually the one that's on the forefront of any dog owner's mind, is like, how much is this going to cost me, right? I don't think that they quite,
Yeah.
just based on the amount of people that I've spoken to, and you tell me if you disagree.
Yeah.
I almost never get a phone call with people worried about like how much of their time it's going to take. It,
Right.
it's always
Good
like
point.
it's always like, so how much is it? And you can hear them like bracing themselves on the other end of the phone, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
price
mm-hmm.
point I think is a big one, and there was something in particular that I wanted to bring up. So definitely it can be a barrier to entry, of course. I mean, that's why, just in a market system period, that's why there are several programs, right? Otherwise there'd be one price, one program, and like there you go. And there, I do know of a
Right.
couple kennels that do that, or at least they do very limited programs, you know. And I think we've talked about them a little bit before, and you know, that's for a later time. But one thing I really want to get into when we talk about price being a potential barrier to entry is you have to discuss the pain point. I put pain point in quotes, right, for owners. And this is something that I heard Sean talk about, Sean O'Shea of The Good Dog, right? Shout out to you guys. Um, Sean O'Shea and The Good Dog, for those of you guys who may not know, they work, I think they work exclusively e-collar. I'm pretty sure that's true. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and they work almost exclusively reactive dogs, or shy, nervous, like behavioral stuff, right? Kind of like Tommy Davis a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
they've marketed themselves that way on purpose, which is totally fine. You know, I'm sure it's the same thing as Tommy. It's just it's what you like, right? So it's what you do. Now, with that being said, you're dealing with dogs that are potentially more risky, right? Not only a danger to maybe yourself or other dogs, but to themselves, or just to, you know, weird things like there's escape artist dogs, there's whatever. What if the dog gets loose? What if, you know? So for that reason, Sean was talking, I want to say it was an episode of one of his like Saturday Q&As that they do. Um, they were talking about the like pain point for owners, meaning I charge enough. I obviously don't want to charge people like more than is fair or whatever the case, but I charge enough that I know that if the owners are shelling out this kind of cash, they're going to take the training seriously, even after the dog leaves
Right.
us. And, you know, and it has that lasting impression. And I can, you know, I'll be realistic with you guys that as a trainer, or even just as a business owner, period, you do have to factor that sometimes, because it sounds dumb and it shouldn't be this way. But sometimes, for whatever reason, if you don't charge comparable, let's say, to other trainers in the area, people automatically assume that you're of lesser quality. And, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
That's
I
true.
did this little test, you know, and I'm sure Brent, you know, you've done a similar test. But when I first moved back to Los Angeles, it was like 15 or 16, something around there. Um, I was trying to figure out my rates. So I would offer this person this much, that person that much. And I wasn't trying to like gouge people. It was just, I'm just trying things out, trying to figure out where I fit into this whole thing. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
did notice, and it was actually it was quite pronounced. It wasn't even like that close. The less expensive the lessons, the people were more likely to cancel or reschedule on me
100%.
by a
Yep.
lot.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So yeah, you know, that was just something. And you know, and there's a couple other things to you know, take into account. Like I think that a fair point to bring up, and I want to hear you riff on this a little bit, is just
Mm-hmm.
one has to weigh realistically. This is the trainer's job, by the way, so you guys pay attention. Realistically, weigh the workload, right? Because as trainers, you know, sometimes as a younger trainer or a newer trainer or whatever the case, you're uncomfortable telling a potential client no. You know, they're like, can I do some private lessons for this dog that's got these issues? And you're like, you know, I don't think that that would be good for you. But a lot of people are too afraid to say no, you know, so they do their best with what they think the owners are okay with, which would be privates or group classes or whatever the case. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
since we're the ones who have the experience and know that this dog potentially could go this way, this way, this way, with the different variables, the time it takes, and so on, it's our job to explain to the owner what the workload is going to look like. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify the question. Are you talking about the workload that's needed to get the dog from point A to point B, or?
Yeah, yeah.
or the
So the way that we had it broken down was the workload that's needed to get the dog from point A to point B, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with, what do the owners like, what do they expect from the dog, what's going on with the dog, and and so on.
Got it, got it, got it. Yes, yes, yes. So yeah, again, it kind of goes back to, how much work do we have to do as trainers and how much work do the owners have to do so that we can totally come together and create success for this dog,
Right.
right? So obviously, some of that we can actually talk a little bit more in the behavior because I think a lot of this is predicated on the actual dog's behavior and what kind of things that they're suffering from. But let's say we have a dog who we know for a fact is going to need a lot of conditioning, and we know that that lot of conditioning cannot be done by the owner, because let's say they're a mother of four and she's very active in a lot of other things other than just her kids, right? She's not going to have the time to do those things. And so in essence, what people are really paying for is they're paying for someone's time, right? So we tend to see the less amount of time that the trainer has to spend, the more money they save, right? So pretty much group classes and private sessions are always going to be more lower priced than a board and train or any type of takeover programs where the trainers are doing a majority of the conditioning and repetition,
Right.
right? And that's the exchange, right? So if we as trainers understand, like, so someone might come in saying, I want group classes, but the funny thing is their dog is lunging and barking and snarling at things, and they might want group classes because in their mind they go, my dog has a socialization problem, therefore I need to be around dogs to socialize. It's true, to an extent, it's just out of order, right? So that happens all the time. Dogs who have socialization issues, people want to jump into group classes, and they're looking at this beautiful low price point of a couple $100s for a group class, and they're really attractive to it, but the amount of work it's going to take to get that dog to not lunge and bark. And funny enough, even the group class may or may not be the right environment for that dog to try and learn these
Hmm.
things, in a healthy way. That has to be weighed out in our pricing. So sometimes people are attracted to price points, but they don't necessarily know the amount of work that has to go into the dog. And that's our job, to really educate people. It shouldn't be about price points. One thing that my mentor used to always tell me, if if the conversation you have with a client, if the first thing you guys talk about is price points, then you already messed up in your teaching and your explanation or your evaluation. Because our job as trainers is that we really need to talk about the issues at hand, explain to them the process, and then give recommendations of, whether we need to do board and train, private training, why we need to do it, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's at this point here that I have to, admit, as a younger trainer, I mean, there have been many times that I can think of just off the top of my head right now that it's like I knew better, but I was
Mm-hmm.
too nervous to ask for that. Because here's another thing when we're talking price point. As a younger
Mm-hmm.
trainer, and you're absolutely right, by the way, I would just add one more thing when you're talking about essentially you're paying for a person's time. I would throw expertise in there with time, and I would also throw risk
Mhm. And
factor, right?
efficiency
Efficiency,
and overhead and all these and
right?
team and what they have available to them as resources. It's a bunch of
Sure,
different things.
like a mechanic, right? They've got the tools, they've got everything else, but
Yeah.
all that stuff costs money, which is why they charge whatever their hourly is, right?
Right.
So
Exactly. Exactly.
with that being said, as a younger trainer, to get back to the story, I would kind of decide for myself in the in the evaluation process and would talk to the owners about, yeah, I think that just based on this, I think you'd be better off going with a board and train program. I don't think group classes would be a good idea for this dog. It could be a matter of safety. It could be a matter, like you said, of just not being the right environment for that dog to grow and learn. And
Hmm.
and then owners are like, yeah, it's just money or something, and could we just do this instead? And I'm like, okay, and I would just kind of go with it. So
Yeah.
it was a mistake on my part because I can totally understand where they're coming from, right? Board and train programs, typically speaking, are not cheap. I struggle to find anywhere in America really where they're not at least upwards of like $1,000, $2,000, depending on how long it is, right? So,
Right.
and that's not nothing. That's a lot of money. So,
Right.
as a younger trainer, you get nervous about asking for that kind of money. You almost
Hmm.
don't feel like
100%.
deserve that kind of cash. Even private lessons you sell for pretty cheap, and and so on. And so that is something that was totally my fault for doing, and I should have done board and trains with these dogs, and I'm confident the dogs would have done better, and so on and so on.
Right.